chat here. See here. So put this in here. Now, usually with JavaScript, a cool thing that you can do with JavaScript is actually like, you'll see it later when we get to it, is go through tables and like parse data with them. But in general, a table, and if you actually, I'll do this for us too. We kind of have some basic code starting up, but I kind of want to make it from scratch so we see everything that happens. So that first link in chat is general information about a table. The second link is information about a try it yourself table. So you can go ahead and have those open, but I'm going to go and make a new VS Code program for us. So let me do that real quick. Cool. And again, if you have previous things made, you can try to reference them. I'm going to create this to be table practice. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this all blank for us. So again, sometimes you'll find if you're coding a lot with HTML, Jao brought up a good point yesterday, is if some of us have done Python or other languages, oops, the name's invalid. We'll notice that whenever you create code that doesn't compile or shouldn't work, your compiler will give you an error and it won't be able to run it. But in HTML, it will actually run code that is kind of broken too. So again, sometimes you might find that it might be nice to restart in some scenarios if it's very embedded and like you're not sure where to go all. But usually that's kind of like a last ditch effort, I would say. Usually just reading through it each line by line is good enough to see how your errors are occurring. So what I'm doing now is I'm just making our basic list of our HTML file. This should be kind of like verbatim for us by now. We'll see that we have a head. We have our style. Oh, excuse me.
Is there any, what other types of doc exists despite HTML?
Sure, like different types of doc type?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Let me see. I believe, let's see here. I think what they used to be is one called public. I think one was called public. Actually, let me look up. WTree has some information about this one. So in HTML4, we're on HTML5 now, so it's a bit more advanced. But in HTML4, there used to be, if you look at that link there, Sullivan, there's a bunch of different ones that are inside of there. Let me see if I can zoom in. Oh, that's... Oh, the image is kind of low res. That's a pretty bad image. But essentially, we have our doc type HTML top level element, and then you could kind of describe different things with public and these domains with HTML4. So you can actually do things like this. We usually, when we're coding with it, that's not that much of an issue. But there's, yeah, you can provide parameters like URL is equal to up here, and that's just more information about the current document. So it's just general information about the document. Doc type of HTML, the top level one, is just telling us this document is of type HTML.
Got it. All right.
Cool. And yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So what we could do here, let's go ahead and see what we can do. Where am I? Going in. Okay. I'll get rid of my head for the time being. Or I'll add a style into here. And for the time being, what we've seen yesterday is that we kind of exposed it a little bit later on with students' question. But in general, if you ever want to go ahead and make a table in HTML, we're going to use this table type of element. Let me also, because some of us might be looking at the PowerPoint as well, let me pull up our PowerPoint really quick. We won't go through the entirety of it, just kind of the core points of it. Let's see here. Nice. Okay. Um, and you'll see here that the HTML, sorry, is that one? The HTML5 standard for tables, it's usually for tabular data. So what tabular data means essentially is table data. So like table one or column one, column two with a certain amount of rows. That's the easiest way you can think about these tables. And it's hard to make them look really nice with HTML right away, like these different types of table, like a layout table. So essentially, if you're going to be using HTML for tables, you want to make sure that your data is tabular. Okay. And there's going to be a few elements that we're going to be looking at so far with these tables. These are built into HTML. First one is the table guy. So he's the head honcho in charge of the entire table. So everything is underneath that table. Very similar to a body or a main div that we might be working with. You can use a caption for the table's title. So caption will relate to wind disasters right here. And then we can use a TR element for each row and a TH element for each heading label. And then a TD element for each data cell, and we can indent properly. So there's a few things going on here, but why don't we try to like mimic this wind disaster code here? So we want to kind of talk about wind disasters, and then we'll have tornadoes and hurricanes. So why don't we try to code this up together? So if I have a table, like so, let me pull up my guy here. Nice. What we could say here now is that, okay, I want my caption of my table. This one seems to be saying wind disasters. Now you'll notice here that my caption is kind of scrunched up. And even if I full screen it, it looks like wind disasters. What's happening there is that your table will kind of HTML, if you don't provide it specific styles and margins, it will automatically expand or contract the length of your rows and data that you're working with. Okay, so this caption is pretty straightforward. And what we can do next is this TR. So TR stands for a row inside of your data. And you'll notice that if I don't provide anything inside of here, nothing really happens. And if I put like tests inside of here, you'll see that this is a really weird output. So essentially a TR is this element that doesn't really take in anything. So TR isn't supposed to determine anything in your table. All it's supposed to do is say this is a current row in my table. So this represents a row of cells in a table, and all it is a placeholder. So don't try to type out anything when you do a TR. So I'll do it like this again. I have two rows in my table right now, and what I can do now is every time that you create a table, you can use this TH element, and this represents a header in the table. So what we were seeing in our code is the tornadoes. And if you'll see here now, my wind disasters is still above it, and my tornadoes is below it. So this is looking a bit neater. And all I did here is put my TH, which is a table heading, between these two guys. So I'm going to kind of copy this one more time. Hurricanes like so. I'm going to put in my hurricanes. And now you'll notice that it automatically made this a bit larger because I had the two guys side by side there, okay? So now I have one table row with two table headings inside of it. What can I do with this table row down here? Well, now you can pretty much try to match up each table data with the heading. So HTML table creation isn't like Excel where it's like kind of built in for you. It's a bit more manual, but essentially what you could say is that if I want to put in a piece of data that's not a heading, I could do TD, which is a table data element, data cell in the table. And now if I put this TD here, this is going to match up with my tornadoes up here. Okay. And it looks like this one was called Joplin, my first one. I'm getting these words from this guy over here. This guy was called Joplin. And now what was the hurricane that I had? It looked like the hurricane was Katrina. So I'm going to go ahead and type that one in. And now we'll see here that they're underneath these ones. And again, what happens if I do it this way? If I swap these two guys here, we'll see that it's a one-to-one correlation. So anything here will be represented in a different table data. So one more unfortunate thing that you could do, which is like because HTML kind of lets you do anything, is I can actually expand my table out a bit past my headings, right? So my win disasters are here and I'm expanding the table out. Unfortunately, though, you want to make sure that you have the same amount of headings each there. So I can add 2 more headings if I want. But that's just showing you that those pieces are there. So let's try to do 2 more hurricanes here. How do I create a new row instead of my table? Well, what we saw earlier was that I could do TR, right? And now I have my TD. This one was called Tri-State Tornado. This is called Andrew. Okay. Very basic table here, but you'll see here that it's already kind of a bit of code. See that there? We can see that this entire snippet of code represents this table that's created there. Okay. So again, yep.
Quick question. There's any way to, instead of doing the table side by side, can I do it up and down and then put the elements on the right?
Sure. Yeah. So the way that you would do that is it's a bit more. You would have to kind of modify the way that it's laid out. So let's try to make a secondary table below it here. So we'll keep this normal guy. Then let's try to do a line break. So I'm going to create a second table. And so you'll mean to put like the headings, kind of like tornado, a hurricane, and then have them expanding out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what we could do here is essentially the way that you change it is based on how you instantiate the rows. So if I want to go ahead and create, let's do another caption, and I'll say this alt wind disasters, like alternative wind disasters. So different table. Now what I could do here is I could say, okay, well, I need to create a row. And in my first row, I had this row dedicated to my headings. But if I want to put my headings before my pieces of data, you're more than welcome to do a TH here. And then inside of my tornadoes, or I could type out my tornadoes. Okay, so I have my tornadoes right here. But remember, we saw it earlier that I can kind of spam out rows as long as I'd like. So what I could do now is essentially underneath my heading, or not under, or technically in the code underneath it, but to the right of my heading, I can now do a TD. And inside of that TD, I could do something like Katrina. And if these are all the tornadoes that I had, the other one I had was Tri-State, because now instead of going down, we're going side to side. And if I do it this way, where I have the heading followed by the pieces of data in the same row, we'll see now that it looks a little weird because we didn't do styling yet. But now I have a bolded tornadoes and then Katrina Tri-State. Let's try to finish this one up. So how do I get that second row down there? Well, again, all it was a row. So I can do another T here. I can put a new heading inside of here called hurricanes. And then could go ahead and say table data Joplin, table data Andrew. Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Cool, great. Again, everyone, this is kind of up to you on how you approach it. If you want like a vertical aligned chart, the only thing is that you have these tools, and all you really need to remember is what all these singular elements mean. So again, table is the head honcho. Caption gives you the name of the table. TR is table row. TH is table heading. So the heading can be vertical or horizontal. TD is your table data. So that's gonna, oops. So those are the main things that you'll need to kind of shift around for those ones. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on these elements, or does this make sense to folks? Hi, Mark Mardran. I'm going to go ahead and toss this code into the chat for you. So we just made a new, oh, you know what I'll do for you? I'm going to put the HTML file we're working on into the chat. Let's see here. If you'd want to download that, we're introducing tables right now. They're pretty straightforward. Essentially, there's a few elements here. Table element is your main guy, captions the name, and then TR is table row. This one's table heading, and then we have table data. Okay. So I don't. I know we're pretty sick of styling, but again, styling is the exact same thing for these ones, right? TR. Right now, all my table rows are brown. DH. This blue. Oh, those guys are kind of like have a light blue hue to the back of them. It's a little hard to see. I'll make this one blue white. It looks ugly. Light blue. There we go. Okay. So same thing with styling. All of these can be applied, and again, the exact the same concepts for them as well. Okay. So styling can be worked in, and you can do IDs with these guys as well. I can do a table ID is equal to table 1. What I could say up here is # table 1. That's the ID I'm looking for. I want this table color to have a background color of burly wood. Now that entire table has a background color of burly wood. You'll notice that the caption is above the table, and that's on purpose, so the caption can exist outside of that. Cool. Puni's here, good. Okay. Let's see here. Let's see. Nice. So one more thing is that tables are kind of hard to read if there's no borders. So the main thing I want to show with the styling is this kind of border style. So the general styling for borders inside of HTML is if you type out border, you could just do something like thin or border solid. And you'll see here that it surrounds my entire table with a solid line. But how do I get to each of these guys? Well, you can target the actual table row. Oh, Seca is not working for me. Why don't I try to target the table data as well? Nice. So if we target the table data, each piece of data is surrounded with this type of border that's there. But in general, let's see here. If we want to kind of put a thin solid line around all these guys, what you could do is at the very bottom down here, kind of apply it to table, table head, and table data. And then you could say something like thin, or I think it's just solid, right? Let's see what happens if I do it this way. And you'll see now that once I apply it to table, table head, and table data, I get this kind of border around all of my guys there. Okay. So one thing here is that you might have noticed too is that like it looks a little odd in comparison to what we see here. So what you could do as well with these ones is have the like tables border be heavier if you'd like, and you can change the kind of weight of these as well. Okay. So one way that we could change the weights is this. I think it's width. See here. You could change border top and bottom. See here. See if I can do 0 or 20 pixels. You'll see that that kind of reduces my border's bottom. If I do, let's see what happens if I do -20. So the inverse happens if I do negative. So you can kind of play around with these guys as well. With these borders. Right now, I'll leave it as the default one for this scenario. But again, the general idea is that you could change kind of thickness of it too. Top radius. So you can find another example. inline start color. So there's a lot of different pieces of information here as well. And you can also change like the left and right colors of it if you want to get really fancy with your borders. But in general, this is all you'll really need to work with these guys. Okay. You'll notice when I did border width of 50 pixels around all of them, they have a massive amount. So let me just kind of change that back to 5 pixels. Okay. That's actually looking a bit better, but you'll see that all of them are a bit thicker. So if I want to just change my table again, I can do table border width is 5 pixels, and now all these guys are kind of smaller, but my table has a decent sized border around it. Maybe 2.5 is better. Cool. Okay. And as you saw earlier, let me pull up this as well. If you have header cells on the left, you'll want to differentiate from the one at the top as well. And what we can see here is that we might have another element called T head and T body to differentiate this. So the way that we did this was a bit more manual, but we could also introduce these concepts of T head in our style. So what we could do here, if we scroll down, let's see if these are built in for us. Okay. So T header of our tables, let me go ahead and just copy a basic table over one more time for us. So I'm just going to duplicate the table that we saw already. I'm going to call this duplicated one final wind disasters. Let me kind of get rid of all of this stuff in the middle. Okay, so I have my final wind disasters. If I go ahead and I type out T head, this is an element that represents the block of rows that consists of the column labels or headers for the parent table element. What that means essentially is that you might have a few different headers as we see in our assignment. So per the example, what we could say in our T head, let's just go ahead and put a TD inside of here and say something like year. You'll see here that it automatically puts my year up there, even though I didn't put in a row just yet. And now I go ahead and I say TD of, let's do like temp rank. This is from the slide, so I'm just kind of mimicking it. Let me call this, instead of wind disasters, let me do temps, something like this. Oops, let's see here. And my last one will be something like a TD of average temp, F in Fahrenheit. And we'll see now, it looks like I'm getting a pretty decent chunk of line break of my guys over here. One more issue though is that the T head is different from the T body. So the T body is another element that's going to consist of blocks of rows that are the body of your data. So in your T body, what you could do with this guy is you could try to do something similar where you just immediately put into TD, but it's better practice to actually still use your table rows inside of here, just because that's what we're used to. So let's do like year 2016 for our table row. Let's see what happens if I do it this way. We'll see it's kind of broken because I'm not using the table data. So that was my year there, and an issue arises is, let's just say that I remove this table row. We'll see it works out okay, but if I put in one more piece of data, let's say I'm going up to 2017, it puts my year into the other column. So this is why we're going to want to use these table rows to make sure that we avoid this scenario where we're putting the guy inside of the wrong column, because we're not putting him into the column there. Okay. So again, just have a row for each of these guys, but what T-body and T-head does is kind of give us another access point to differentiate between the headers and the getters. And again, you can, either way is fine. You saw that the tornadoes did it this way. This way is another way to do it too. In this scenario, it looks like we have a bunch of headers at the left and right. Cool. Cool. So, how's everyone feeling with the tables? Anything in particular that anyone would like a review of, or these pretty straightforward? No questions. No thanks. Okay. Oh, okay. So, Putney, T head, you don't necessarily need to use it. But T head essentially is going to, if you want to take all of your headers of your rows and keep them together in something, you could put them all into T head style. And the reason we do this, or element, and the reason we do it is up here. You'll notice that what we had to do earlier when I wanted to change my header elements here is to manually change TH with this background color. If I tried to do T head in my style, and let me do background color of sienna or something like that, see here that all of my headers of my table are now changed. Now, what happens if I want to change anything in my body? That's where T body comes into play. Some weird color names there. You'll see here that even though, and this is interesting, if folks see this, I didn't declare T body anywhere else except for down here, but T body represents every single body of your table, so it changes all the body things of your table. Okay, but it knows these are the headers. That's what T head represents essentially. You can make a table without using it, but usually it's useful to use it in that scenario. Okay, does that make sense, Putney, with the T head?
Yep. I have a question, John.
Sure.
Why do you use the caption tag instead of the H1 or
Oh.
other padding?
Great question. So instead of doing something like
H1?
oh yeah,
H2?
let me do which one? So the caption tag is a special. So wind disasters would work for me, but what the caption tag does for us, again, it's just another element that you can pick to use. This is represents the title of the table that is its parent. So if it has a parent, and that is a table element. So caption is built into HTML to say, you know what, this person is saying caption. I'm going to display. And do you see how like the title is kind of right above the line up there of this table on Alt Wind Disasters? What caption does is say, I'm going to look what my parent is. If my parent is a table, a parent is like the guy above you essentially, the outer level one. So this parent is a table. What happens if it's a table? And it's a table element, that means that I am the title of that table. That's what caption does.
Oh, got it.
So it's a built. So now this table, with the idea of table one, has a title of wind disasters. Whereas if you used H1, that wouldn't happen.
All right, got it. Awesome.
Yep, great. And again, you can technically use H1, but you would have to do some padding and stuff. But it's not that big of a issue. Again, these are just like a lot of different tools. Up to you to use for those. Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Nice. Okay, Booney. Cool. So, some of us might have been doing project 2 already, and some of us might. I've also been struggling a bit with like putting divs side by side and centering things. And what we'll be looking at now, there's two main things that happens when we're going to center a table or a div. Centering a div is another one. But essentially, there's this concept of display called flex. And this flex property, it creates a flexible box layout. And that kind of takes care of a lot of things for us. So there's this term called justify content in our center. And let me just have this guy up here. Go half and half. Okay. So for my table, let me get rid of my ID of this guy really quick. I'll just make them all general. Okay. So for each of my tables, I might want to do something where I say like justify content. And I could say center here. And you'll notice that nothing happens when I refresh it. Okay. This could be really frustrating because you're wondering, I'm justifying it in the center, what's happening. What you need to do is, if you ever want to kind of move the contents of a lot of divs or a div or material, what you can add is this display property. And this is going to determine some boxes or divs and their positions. And there's a few different properties here. There's either a block property. There's a flow property. Some of us might have seen flow. Inline is something that puts it inside. The one we're the most interested in is this flex container box. And flex, as the name kind of suggests, allows us to, well, now I kind of ruined my tables there, but it allows us to pretty much put everything into the center there. So now I'm actually technically centering all the content of my table rather than the full table itself. Let me try to fix this up a little bit. So if I redo this one, and let me take a look at my Wind Disasters T table data. If I do display flex and justify content there, you'll notice that it centers kind of everything together. Let me kind of remove the display here. And when I remove that display flex, it doesn't do it anymore. So again, if you want to use these justify contents based on where they're located, you're going to need to add in that display flex concept. It looks like the one that's working out for us best here is this Alt Wind Disasters one, because I coded these a few different ways, so it's going to look a little wonky sometimes. See here? Cool. But now that kind of centers it. Now, one thing that we could do here, let's see, instead of just trying to center all of these individual tables, I want to go ahead and center all the content of this page rather than each table. And we remember that our body is an element inside of our code. So what we could say is, you know what, give my body the display flex and justify content of that flex box in the center. And now it centers everything for us. I'm probably going to have to add in a bit of coding in between each of these guys to make them go line by line. But now everything in my page is centered. Okay. So if you're working on a div and you're trying to center it, or you're trying to center a few things, make sure you play around a bit with this display flex property, because now you will have access to justify center one. So in this scenario, we're putting them horizontally. Let's see here. Cool. And what I'd like to showcase here is this next content of cell spanning. So we'll have this example on this web page here that we have 6 rows and 6 rows and 3 columns. And we could see here that we might encounter a scenario where we have kind of these merged cells together. And this is where these attributes of cell spanning and COL span come into play. Okay, so to perform merge, we can insert column span is equal to 2 in the TH element that stores the events text. So right here, we have a piece of text that says TH is equal to 2. Let's actually try to code that here. I'm going to comment out my body thing really quick for these ones. And let me try to just make, in my temp ranking one, I'm going to remove my average temp. See here, so I got rid of one of those guys. But, let me see here. I want to add in an extra row down here. And what I'll do for us, oops. Let me make this color a bit more nicer too. Okay. So what I want to show to us really quick is that essentially, how do I have like a spanning column? So if I have my temp rank up here, this guy is going to say, let's just put it day 1 and then day 2. So essentially I have my rank over here, and let me do this a few days underneath each of these guys just for example purposes. So how do I go ahead and get this guy to span over? Well, in my table heading that I created over here, temp rank, which was up here, my T head, or by table data as well, I can add this attribute called col span, which is built into it, and I could try to put it to 2, similar to what we saw over here. And see here, we'll notice now that once I added my column span is equal to 2, it kind of adds in all of these guys together into a meter function and then expands it. If I do it to tree, you'll notice I don't have a third column out there, so it won't really attempt it. If I leave it at 1, I'll get the same issue I had before. Okay. Nice. That's column span. What about 2016 down here? I have day 1 and day 2 right here. Or maybe I want day 1 to expand. I can do row span. And you'll see here that I get a really weird output. Let me delete one of these guys real quick. And now you'll see that I'm spanning 2 rows instead of just the columns there, right? So essentially, let me go back to what we had here. Let's just say that I want temp rank to expand over these 2, but I want 2017 to replace my 2018. What I could say now is 2017 as a table data has a row span of 2. So it spans 2 rows. And now we'll see that my HTML automatically sees my 2018 because it's like, I'm not going to get rid of it for you. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it so it looks a bit nicer. And now we'll see here that I'm spanning 2 rows in my column there. Now, you're not required to use them into a TR or a TD, so you can use them in any TD or TH that you like, but that's essentially what the span means. It says, I'm going to span 2 columns, I'm going to span 2 rows, okay? Is this making sense to folks here, this span? Sometimes the span can be a bit confusing. Okay. Let's see here. Does anyone have any questions on a column or row span? No? Okay, cool. So again, there's a few examples with this guy. Let me see here. Yep, so there's 4 data tables. We can use the table element in HTML, but we said earlier you most likely for a layout table. And what was a layout table again? A layout table is something like this where it's like a collage of things or something neater. We're going to use CSS, and we can do a CSS layout table with this display property. Now, there's a few values a part of a display property that's going to mimic table related elements. So in CSS, we'll have a table item here, and then we'll have a table caption, table row, table cell, table header. Now, how do we build something to be displayed in our code using only CSS? Well, let's actually do it inside of our style up here. And I'll go ahead and make a comment. Oh, is it? Is it not? There it is. Okay. I forgot what the comments were in CSS. Sorry about that. So if you see there how it's green, that means that it's a comment, so it won't run. So essentially, if we're going to go ahead and create a table using purely CSS, we're going to reference this table CSS property. And we can go ahead and let's see here. I'm going to call it dot table for the time being because we're going to reference it later. And what I want to do is have this display mode. And earlier we saw that we said display of flex, or display flex does one thing for us. So essentially, if you want to build things inside of, there's a grid one here as well. If you want to build things using CSS, you're going to use a display, and voila, there's actually a display of table. And this generates a principal table wrapper box containing additional generated box. So essentially what this means is like, I'm going to go ahead and make a table for you. Now, let's go ahead and very basically, after you go ahead and in your table, say display table, you could do something that says, let's see here, there's a table layout. And we could do auto for the time being. Cool. Let's try to see if this guy works for us here. And what I'm going to do is, how do I actually declare this table in my code? Well, what we're going to do is create a placeholder object for us, like a div. And this div is going to take in the value of the attribute we made up here. So essentially, if we're using a selector called table, we could call it actually, let's do my table. What we're going to do down here, if it's a dot, is say that this div class is of my table, okay? Now, nothing really pops up here for us. But we'll see here at the very bottom that we do have this type of table displayed to us. Cool.
Can I make a quick question? It's not
Sure.
about this specific. I was just noticing your code. It's just like a habit of you separating like for example, they on the screen on the table data they want to separate in 3 columns instead of separating lines. It's just a habit, or it's something that we should like create this habit because we're gonna use in the future. Instead of like separating the day one between 2 table datas in 3 columns, separating the same line.
Oh, sure. So
To give us the same effect, right?
are you referencing right here in the?
No, on the code.
Oh, in the code.
Yeah,
Let's see.
day one table data on the column on the line 173.
33.
So you
Oh,
could
so like how I do it, like, is it better to do it this way?
no, I mean that's just a habit of you, or something that we should.
Oh yeah, the code I find it's more readable. If you could see what visuals, this is kind of VS Code actually doing it for me, so I I don't really have control over it. So you'll see here actually, if I create a TD item, it automatically will tell me where to put it in for me.
Okay.
Based on the formatting. But I will say that in VS Code, because sometimes with HTML the issue is that it doesn't give you errors. It's really hard to find an issue in it. So having it formatted like this, where the lines match up, and you can see where the plain text is, makes it a lot easier. I would say kind of get into the habit of having it separated like that, because it's just going to be easier for you to find code. Again, though, like, you technically submit something that has everything on one line, it's just going to be really hard to figure out what the issue is and stuff. So I would say I would recommend get into a style that you feel helps you find the issues pretty quick and like you're comfortable using. If this style you think is good, then you can mimic it. But it's not like I won't be taking out points or anything based on the style there.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome. So let's see here. And let's look up one more thing for us real quick. Let's see here. Let's see if I can get. Yeah. So in general, let's see here. That's another way that we could do the CSS to work with it. And essentially, when we're making our CSS table, each of the elements that are a part of, I'll call this one instead of my table. Again, let me call it dot table. You're going to be required to, very similar to our HTML elements, to reference each of the CSS guys as their name. So if I want a caption for my excuse me, if I want to put a caption on my table using CSS, I'm going to need to override a dot caption in my CSS code. And then the display that I'm going to use upstairs or up the other guy was called display of table. In this scenario, it's going to be table, and you'll see here that we actually have access to all these table dash. A table caption will give me the caption of it. Okay. Cool. And again, if I want to go ahead and kind of make a table row behavior of my CSS, I could type in dot row. Display is table row. So this display part is the most important part that you'll need to remember in comparison to, you can kind of call these whatever you'd like, but the general idea is that if you're calling them, let me call this, let's do these classes as dot my's. So dot my table, dot my caption, dot my row. Let's go ahead to our div and let's see what happens here. So I have a div class of my table. Div class is equal to my row. Cool. It looks like, let's just see here. So now we're kind of getting this table information out from here. If I create another class, not my row. Let me do my caption. We'll see here that my table caption is kind of scrunched up again, similar to what we saw earlier. If I create another div that is of class my row, say this piece of test data, we will now see that my row header or title is expanding out. So again, an issue with this one is that you're going to need to not override, but to implement your own versions of table captions, row and columns, or not columns, but and row headers. And if you want, these guys are the most important you'll need to remember: display table caption, display table row. And you can see here in the display properties that you have in your presentation talks about it. It's just mimicking each of the behaviors of what a TD and a TR already does. So all we're doing here is just mimicking behavior, nothing too advanced. One thing that you'll find interesting is that this guy down here, dot row with this arrow, with an asterisk, that is going to tell all of the row elements to behave like table cells. So I'm going to do that here. What I'm going to type underneath dot my row is dot my row, and I'm going to tell my code to say, go ahead and grab all the children of my row and make them all act like a table cell. Let's do a text align to right. Nothing changes over here because I have my first piece of my row. But what I'm going to say now is div and let me add two more divs inside of here. We'll see that I get this as a test twice. Let me go ahead and see if I can apply center for the text align. I might need to also apply my class to these guys. So let me do class is equal to my row. It should be updating. We might need to do one more thing. Okay, seems like it's not updated just yet. But again, the main idea is that we have these functionalities similar. So let's see here. What is it? A span? Is it? Let me try a span really quick. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Let me just try one more span. Then, okay. I think that's doing something similar for us. Similar items, but again, everyone, this is just a way if you're asked to create something with CSS, you're going to create your own color, or excuse me, your own CSS names, and then you can override it by using this display dot method there. Okay, cool. And why do you want to use these CSS over the regular HTML? Main reason is these position properties. So I would go ahead and recommend to take a look at these position properties live items that they have. They have events where they kind of showcase what happens when you change the position of items in live times. But the default knowing layout scheme for CSS is normal flow, and it lays out block elements top to bottom. There's a few different positions we can use. We can use position absolute. This tells the browser to position the element that we're on relative to its containing block. So this is normally the HTML element, where the text area is text area of the browser. We can also specify a distance from the left and the top of these positions, and we can also specify the width and height. We saw this again with the picture that we changed yesterday, and the reason why is that we could see here, you can kind of draw out these layouts of each of these guys. You can kind of position where you want everything to be. So you can see, like, I want my header to be 620 pixels across. I want 10 pieces of space before this one where I have 30 pixels. And then I want 300 between these two guys and 20. So this is a general layout to just check out what the width and the height are doing. And you can also position them, like this guy would be positioned to the left. He'd probably be positioned to the top. He'd be positioned to the right, he'll be positioned to the top, and so forth. Okay. We could see here, what we'll do is I'm going to provide this to us as well after the after our HTML code. So let me try to run this code that we have here. Oops. So this is, oh, you know what? This will be its own. I'll go ahead and create that for us real quick here. Do it this way. Cool. All right, so we can see here now that I have this type of neat little program that kind of puts these guys side by side to each other. And how does the code actually put them side by side? Similar to what we need for Project 2 a little bit, is you'll see here that I have a title with these position attributes, and it also aligns it for me as well. You can justify the text if you'd like, align the positions, and you'll see here that each of these guys are a part of a class that attributes it to it. So you can either call this an article, you can even call that an A as well if you'd like. Call it whatever you like, but again, this is how we could use CSS to help with it. Okay, cool. So folks, what I'll do here is the CSS table part might be a little confusing, but if you understand the fundamentals of the HTML table, you'll be in good shape.